Here at the Empowerment Zone, we are all about empowerment and impact. And like many of you, I believe that educational empowerment is one of the key pillars that advance African American and Latino success.
Welcome to the Empowerment Zone with Ramona Houston, where we zone in on Black and Brown relations and our journey to empowering our communities.
Yet when many African Americans and Latinos enter the school system, K through 12 or higher education, we experience all types of challenges throughout our matriculation. And many of these challenges are systemic. That is why the presence of African American and Latino educators is so important. They are the ones who help Black and Brown students to see our potential, and they are the ones who work tirelessly to change the educational system that keeps so many of us marginalized. I must admit, I am quite pleased to have pioneering Mexican American Chicano educator, Dr. Jose Leyba, with us. With a career spanning over 45 years in K through 12 and higher education, Dr. Leyba has instituted change within various educational environments to advance the success of all children. By sharing his professional experiences, Dr. Leyba provides us with a wealth of knowledge and a roadmap on how to empower African American and Latino students and impact the educational system. Hi, Dr. Leyba. Welcome to the Empowerment Zone.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. As you recall, we met a few years ago at the HACU conference, Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities, when it was out there in San Diego.
Mm-hmm.
San Diego, yes.
My hometown, right.
Right. And I really, really enjoyed your presentation at the conference. I felt like I was in church and at in the classroom and at a conference all at the same time. And I really, really enjoyed listening to you speak. And I am so honored that you would join us here on the Empowerment Zone.
Thank you very much. I'm glad we were able to finally work it out with our busy calendars and busy lives that we have.
Yes. And so you're one of the premier Mexican American educators. You know, there are very few male educators in higher education. And in fact, the numbers are finally beginning to grow, but we've got a lot more work to do. And
yes, we do.
So can you tell us a little bit about your work as an educator and how you got into education and your professional trajectory?
Yes, as you well know, the neurosciences tell us that our brains are hardwired to receive information in the form of stories. So I'm going to try and be the storytelling that I learned from my grandfather, who was part Yaqui indigenous tribes. So it starts really as a young child growing up in a migrant farming camp and not really having access to education. And starting school right after the local public school had been integrated. And so I had the fortune of having the best teachers, but we did face the same issues that children of color have faced when integration started. And so consequently, there were people that had a great impact on my life. One is my mother, who recently passed away, but she was probably the only Mexican American, Latina or Latino to graduate from high school here in Peoria, Arizona, where we are from. I'm from the Phoenix, Arizona area in 1944. And I remember her taking community college classes to become a nurse. That just, she never said anything, but she led by example. So I think that's what really empowered me and my brothers and sisters to do what we do. And so the seed was planted, and so I was not a good student. Okay, I preferred to. We were born and raised in a migrant camp, and then moved to Southern California in the San Diego area, and grew up in the barrios of San Diego, Logan Heights, where Chicano Park is very famous, and right down from downtown San Diego. We grew up in a barrio called Shelltown. And so went through all the challenges and triumphs and successes of growing up in an at-risk environment. But there was also, we garnered a lot of strengths and a lot of street smarts, which I think have helped me be a successful leader and administrator. And so from there, having very friends that made a great impact, probably one of the greatest was my homeboy, Frankie Coronado, who was unfortunately shot in a gang situation. And there's nothing like seeing your friend's dead body in an alley with body parts all over the place. And it had such an impact. So if I get a little bit emotional, you'll understand why. It still has an impact on me today. And at that time, you don't know that is going to be a driving force for you to be focused on helping kids and helping others. But it was. And likewise, my grandfather, who is half Yaqui, and would take us to work in the fields, my brother and I, when we would move back and forth San Diego and Phoenix, Arizona, and live in on and off during the summers and go work with him in the fields. And he would tell me at an age of 4, we were picking cotton by hand. That's how you know how old I am. Mm-hmm. And he would tell me in Spanish, mijo, ¿quieres trabajar como yo toda la vida? Como burro, ¿quieres ir a la escuela? Son, do you want to work like me in the fields your whole life? Or do you want to go to school? Mm-hmm. Well, when you're 4 years old and your grandfather is your God, okay, your idol, you say, no, I want to work with you, grandfather. You know, I'm 4 years old, my brother and I. So, I mean, you know, life goes along, and, you know, we get to 8th grade and we're hanging out with the homies, and not always probably doing the right things. And my mom puts us on a Greyhound bus, and just get this, we live in San Diego, okay, beautiful weather, puts us on a Greyhound bus to go spend the summers with my grandparents and to work in the fields. And again, we're out there picking cotton or grapes. I can't quite remember what it was, maybe grapes. And he tells me again, son, do you want to work in the fields like me all of your life, or do you want to go to school? And I said, no, I'm going to school. I'm not doing this, okay? Unfortunately, because I love to hang out with the homeboys and love to be cutting classes. When you live in San Diego, California, you know, you got the beach here and you're always cutting classes. And so my brother was, fortunately, he was the bright one. He was the genius. And he's another person I wouldn't be here without his support. And so when I got to graduate from high school, my counselor said, well, you know, don't worry about going to college. You don't have the grades. You come from the South Side, and, you know, you're not college material. So I didn't know whether to cry or whether to jump over the counter there and show him a little bit of what, little education, give him a little barrio education. So, I mean, I felt defeated, you know, and this is what many of my colleagues, people of color, have faced early on in school. You know, we have these X's, these marks, these arrows that are stabbed in our self-concept. Not necessarily, I don't think he meant anything by it, but obviously he didn't see the potential. I did have an English teacher that did, however, and my brother filled out the applications for me to go to Arizona State University, and my English teacher made a phone call on my behalf, and he knew someone, and so I was accepted on a probationary basis to Arizona State University. So I do bleed maroon and gold because it did save my life, and became active in the Metro organization, Movimiento Estudiantil Chicano de Aztlán. You know, would visit Cesar Chavez when he was doing his fasts here in Phoenix to protest the short-handled hoe. And if you give me a minute, I have my grandfather's short-handled hoe.
Oh, wow.
That I've kept. And it's called, in Spanish, this is called a cortito. And this is what, when we were in the fields, my grandparents would have the large hoe to cull the weeds out of the fields. And so as children, we would walk behind them or ahead of them, because we could bend down, and many farm workers had extremely problems with backs and so on, other health problems as a result of bending over in that hard labor. So I keep this as a memento of the struggle, and as a reminder of where I came from. So all those life experiences really formed my goal, which was to do something in life that would empower and help others to reach their potential and to stand up for things that are right. So that's kind of, graduated with my bachelor's degree and decided I want to go to law school. Spent 2 years in law school, decided that wasn't for me, and thought, well, I'm gonna take some time off. And I wasn't doing well, by the way, okay, because I was not a great student. And so I began teaching inner city school here in South Phoenix. Taught what was called then junior high, 7th and 8th grade, English, social studies, remedial math, and I was also the designated bilingual teacher. And that's when we were getting a lot of the gangs here. People don't know this, but in the early 70s, LA County Probation Department and Sheriff's Department would send incarcerated youth, threaten them to incarcerate them or get them to leave town. Well, the first place they came was Phoenix, and so started the junior Crips here, and a lot of the other Latino gang sets. And so that's where my school was situated. So I got to work with all those young people, and I loved every day of it. Never had a headache. Loved going to work. Loved working with young people. But I thought, wow, this is tough work. So I was planning to go back to law school. And one of my students walks into my room, since I was the only Latino bilingual teacher at the school, comes in, sits on my desk and looks at me, puts her hands like this and gave me the look. And I said, Mija, listen, tell me, because I called all my students Mijo or Mija. Okay, it's you're part of my family. So what's wrong? Something wrong? She says, no, Mr. Leyba, I just want to come and thank you because you're the only teacher that pronounces my name Juanita. So that makes me feel really good. And maybe someday I'll become a teacher. So she walks out and I'm sitting there going like, okay, if you've seen the Blues Brothers, when James, when that light hits, okay. And then the church, and the amen and the choir starts singing and there's clapping and joy. And I'm going, okay, this is a sign from the creator that says, okay, Leyba, this is what you're set to do. So I came back to teach. And like I said, never had a headache, loved every day of it. And I was fortunate that in those days, there were not a lot of Latino educators that could mentor us. So I often tell a lot of my colleagues that I'm a graduate of a historically Black college, HBCU. And that college happened to be Langston College in Oklahoma, known for its goat raising program worldwide. And my mentor teacher, Dr. Wileen Bridgman, graduated from Langston. And my mentor superintendent, Mr. Mervyn Lackey, also graduated from Langston. Dr. George Green, the assistant superintendent, had graduated from Langston. In those days in Phoenix, the only district where African Americans could get jobs was the Roosevelt School District. And so we were lucky that we had an African American superintendent and assistant superintendent. And we had our very diverse administration. I think a third of our principals were African American, a third Anglo, and a third Latino. And so it was probably a beacon for diversity back in the early 70s and 80s. And so consequently, they took me under their wing and nurtured me and helped put me on the track to be the best I could be. My superintendent, Mervyn, when he hired me as the principal, assigned me to his school where his son was at and where the board president's son and daughter were at. And little did I know that school was going to be a handful, okay? And but I tell you what, I loved every day of being a school principal, right in the middle of the inner city, gangs, drugs, you name it, violence, but the best families and the best students. And so going back to my teaching career, one of my students was a little, and if you speak Spanish, a little cholita, a little gangbanger wannabe, okay? And she was, the lipstick and the hair and stuff like that. She happened to have the same last name as I did. And so I kind of we had been in touch, and she graduated from college, and I was a human resources director then and hired her for her first teaching position. And so we would stay in touch. And so, you become very connected to students. You see students at the store when you live in the neighborhood. We live in it, and you see them. and they see you and your families. And so it makes a big difference to kids when they see you living in their neighborhood, and they see your families, and they see you in flip-flops, buying a six-pack of Coors or Budweiser. We boycotted Coors back in the days, and then you're going, oh no, they shouldn't be seeing that. And well, why not? I mean, I'm not a drunk, it's natural, But then the next day they come back to, ooh, you should have seen it. I saw him buying beer, and so it was really such a great experience to live in the same community where you taught and where you were a principal. And so after being a principal, my superintendent always told me I could do whatever I wanted. And again, Mr. Mervyn Lackey loved him dearly. Another graduate of Langston Community College there in Oklahoma. And he would come into my office and we'd sit and chat, just talk. And he always dressed just immaculate. And so I always dressed just like he did because he was my role model. But he would tell me the stories of his family in the South, how his aunties and his grandmothers and his great grandmothers, he came from a family of teachers. And I thought to myself, in the Latino community, we don't have that. We don't have that history of educators here, especially as Mexican American, Chicano families. And so I was like, wow, we need this type of culture, And so again, I can't thank those two individuals for just mentoring me. And I often call Mr. Lackey my education father, and was very proud to be at his funeral a few years back and talk to his kids, his two sons who I knew very well, and to thank them. And they thanked me for being there. They're very appreciative, and so did the family. And so moving on from being a principal, I had the opportunity to actually be hired as a director of human resources. And then from there, a Latino superintendent, the very first one of the two that I knew that I had ever known, hired me to be an assistant superintendent here at a district in Phoenix called the Isaac School District, where I spent almost 9 years as assistant superintendent and leading the way in reforming the district and being an advocate for students, and then getting very involved in the legislative process, where my district and the Roosevelt district where I had formerly taught, and two other districts, so one on the Native American reservations and one in what's called Apache Junction, the East Valley, were the four plaintiff districts in a monumental school finance lawsuit called the Roosevelt versus Bishop lawsuit. And I had the task of being co-chair of the 70 districts that sued the state of Arizona back in 1990 to change the inequities in the school finance system. So basically, as you all know, a school in Scottsdale, for example, could raise $600 million in bond construction money because of the land and the property tax.
Right.
Whereas my school district, being the poorest of 55 districts in Maricopa County, we could only raise $6 million to build a school for 1,000 kids. And so those are the inequities that we worked on for 9 years to change the law, and we were successful. However, it was not without a lot of work behind the scenes. That's where I learned the importance of legislative lobbying and the political processes, and becoming involved in the political processes in order to make change. And that was probably one of being co-chair of that group, trying to keep 70 school superintendents in line, and then being attacked by the other 130 superintendents saying, Leyba, what are you doing, man? This lawsuit is crazy. This. I said, you know what? I am in a poor school district, and I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing it for the kids. They deserve the type of facilities and teachers and books and technology that your kids in that district have. So that became a real passion as a superintendent. So leaving the superintendency, my board and I, as you all know, superintendents report to boards of trustees. And the board that hired me, it's often the case, was not the board that said, it's time. Well, I beat them to the punch. I handed in my resignation, said, it's time. You have philosophically moved from being focused on students and change and empowering our communities and being a voice for our communities, to being one that wants to remain the status quo. And so I can't live within that framework. And so I moved on, worked in the Union High School District for a little under a year. as the director of the Urban Systemic Initiative, a National Science Foundation grant that the goal was to raise science and math scores of inner city kids, and very successful with that. And then that's when I made the transition to the Maricopa Community Colleges here in Tempe, Arizona, Phoenix, Maricopa County. 10 colleges at the time, about 200,000 students, and close to 11,500 employees. And I moved into human resources because I had a human resources background as the associate vice chancellor and then acting vice chancellor for human resources, supervising a comprehensive human resources department. And I still remember when I left, there were 11,459 employees. I still remember because I always, it's like at my school, your kids would ask me, Mr. Leyba, how many kids do you have? Well, I have 759. How many wives do you have? I said, I only have one. Huh? And I said, dang, Mr. Leyba, you've been busy. He said, oh, come on now. You're my kid. Every student that walks through this door is my kid, my child. Okay. And I would always tell them, even the knuckleheads, okay, you're my kid, and if you get out of line, I'm going to deal with you. Okay. And so, you have an impact on children and students at K-12 and community and higher education when you, there's a saying in coaching, it says you got to reach them before you can teach them.
Yep.
And it's actually exactly what Dr. Angela Valenzuela from UT Austin in her book has written. It says that you have to love and care. It's called the politics of care. You have to care about Mexican American children in order to teach them. Likewise for, I think more so for children of color. Obviously, any child that comes in your classroom, you're going to love them. You have to love them and respect them and care about them if you want them to learn. But sometimes it seems that for us, the few teachers of color that we have greater responsibility to love those children because we look like them, we talk like them, we act like them, we laugh like them, we eat the same foods they do, we cry at our funerals, we sing in church, we listen to mariachi music, and we do all those things that are critical to student success. Likewise at the community colleges, it's the exact same process, it doesn't change. And I found that when I moved to the community colleges and became an active in many of our student programs in diversifying our faculty. Even though I was in human resources, I always worked with my other divisions and led a team when I was the vice chancellor of HR to partner with NAFIA, the national organization that is the umbrella organization for, I think there's 110 HBCUs at the time. And we became a sponsor. And we were visiting, took a team from Maricopa to visit a number of HBCUs. My most favorite visit was to, it's Mississippi Valley State down in Itta Bena, Mississippi, where Jerry Rice, famous football player, graduated. And I had a VP there, Dr. Casimiro Crockett, and the president, Dr. Newman, that became colleagues. And so we signed articulation agreements so that our African American students in Arizona would have other opportunities, because we had a couple of our students that were going to Howard and to a couple of the HBCUs and were losing their credits because we didn't have a transfer agreement. And I'm going, ding, come on now, folks. What are we doing to our African American students that, we are not empowering them to transfer 24, 30, 60 credits to another university? So that was my goal, was to create those partnerships, even though, Maricopa did not have a large percentage of African-American students. We did have one college, Phoenix College, that had the largest percentage of African-American students. And I worked with one of the faculty members there who had already started an HBCU fair. So we went to these HBCUs and brought them back to continue that fair so that our African-American and all students could be exposed to the richness and the success that African-American students were having in HBCU settings. And I think that was really critical. So I feel really positive that our team, but we're down in Itta Bena, I can still barely say it. And I'm asking the clerk there, excuse me, you know where there's a Circle K or a convenience store and you want to get some gum and a couple of other things? And she said something from the South and I didn't understand her. Girl, I'm going, girl, you got to understand, I'm a Mexican American Chicano from Arizona, okay, and I do not speak Southern, okay? So finally we were able to communicate, and so it's all about culture and being appreciative. I was not negative. We were laughing. By the time we finished, we became the best of friends, that young lady. And so Dr. Newman and Dr. Crockett and her husband, Kelvin, my good friends, invited me to dinner at their home. And so Dr. Leyba, we know you're going to eat our neck bones and all of that. Yeah, I want some potato pie and pecan pie, and give me some lemonade and sit out on the porch. I was all for that. And they said, what about your team? I said, hey, I'm bringing them along. We're gonna acculturate our team, okay? And so we had a great time at the hospitality of the Southern people. Was just amazing. I felt right at home. It felt like my grandma's house and my aunt's house. And so those experiences, I think we need to appreciate.
Yes.
Not turn away from them, but appreciate and embrace them. And so one of my goals at the time as the vice chancellor was to do a faculty interchange. I wanted to take our non-minority faculty to live and teach in an HBCU and see 3,000 or 1,500 beautiful, smart African American children to change their mindset about our African American and our Latino children, our children of color. And so that was really important to establish those partnerships and articulation agreements, as Maricopa still has today.
Wow.
To allow students to articulate. And I think that's one of the issues that I see in higher education, especially community colleges. And our leaders now are struggling with, we won't even get to the pandemic, but before with developmental education and I think the intent was to help students, at-risk students and low achieving performing students grow, but I think it had the reverse effect. Students were spiraling. So Jose Leyba would enroll and take a million classes, use up his Pell Grants, and then all of a sudden, not have a degree in certification. And so the big move the past few years on the guided pathways and the move to change the developmental education, I think are positive moves. And many community colleges have done that and are holding themselves more accountable for student success and student growth. And so I'll talk about another student. When I was at Maricopa, I had moved to one of the colleges as vice president, and we had the ACE program, Achievement in College Education, which brought high school juniors and seniors to take courses at the community college and high school simultaneously, something similar to the early college model. And I always remember one of my Latino students, Luis de la Cruz, and he came into my office one day, and I didn't know him very well. In fact, another student brought him in and said, you got to go see Dr. Leyba. And he says, no, I'm going to drop out. I got all kinds of problems. And he came to my office and says, Dr. Leyba. I said, what's wrong? He says, well, my dad has been deported to Mexico for drugs, and my mother's going with him. But Dr. Leyba, I don't want to go back. I've been here since I was 3. And for me, he says, failure is not an option. And I'm going, this young man at 15 years of age is telling me that was a book written by an author a number of years ago.
Right.
And here's a young man, undocumented, saying failure is not an option. And I said to him, okay, tell me what's happening. And he said, well, my mom left. I'm living in a garage with my younger brother, taking care of him. And there's a lady or a family friend is letting them live in the garage. And I just don't know what I'm going to do. I said, well, first of all, here's what we're going to do. I said, I gave him some money. I said, you take this and you buy your brother a present. And if you need more, you come and see me. But my son at the time, my middle son, was at Arizona State University and wanted to become an immigration attorney and clerking, working as an intern, I believe, at the immigration clinic there at the university. And so I did call him up. I said, I've got a student that needs help immediately. And obviously through the complex laws and stuff, you could designate him as being abandoned and therefore apply for temporary asylum, I believe. I wasn't quite sure what the title was, but he was able to get this young man into the clinic there, and they were able to help him get temporary status. And then he found a family which fostered him. And so, we lost touch for a while. And I get a call from him after he had graduated with his bachelor's degree and was at, I believe, maybe at the University of Michigan, working on a master's. And he had been highlighted in a book called 100 Green Card Stories. And he wrote me a very nice note thanking me. He said that even though we didn't know each other, and someone else brought me to your office, I'll never forget the kindness and the help that you provided. So I wanted you to have a signed copy of this. And so, you have to love these students, whether or not they're adults in, at the age of 50 coming back to the community college, or 18-year-olds or 16-year-olds that are in early college schools. And so I think sometimes as an elementary educator, you do that. And sometimes as a high school teacher, we become content area specialists and we forget that particular. And I think one of the things that the pandemic has taught us about the importance of social and emotional growth and the mental health, especially in our communities that have been ravaged by the pandemic and the lack of health, the bias in the medical system to people of color has just been, I think it's been exposed. Whether or not we change it, who knows? But and so that's been my mantra. Love students and do what you can for them, and challenge the administrators you work with, and then bring up others.
Be sure to check out the remainder of my interview with Dr. Jose Leyba next Monday on April 25th.
A special thank you to the incredible team of the Empowerment Zone. Terry Gully, theme song. NADWorks, digital support, and of course, our featured guest.
If you enjoyed my podcast, please subscribe. We are on all of your favorite podcast platforms. Be sure to rate us on Apple Podcasts too. Thank you for your continued support.